Before taking on this role, she served as the CEO of the World Bank from 2017 to 2019. She has a long commitment to global leadership, joining the bank in 1993 as an environmental economist, serving in many senior positions, including as Director for Sustainable Development, before being appointed Vice President and Corporate Secretary in 2008. Upon her appointment as Managing Director, she stated, and I quote, "The immediate priority of the IMF is to help countries minimize the risk of crises and be ready to cope with downturns," close quote. And she emphasized their focus on their long-term work, quote, "to build stronger economies and to improve people's lives," close quote. We are honored to have this conversation here at Georgetown, where we're called to reflect on the contributions we can make as individuals and as an institution to our global community. This gathering is an opportunity for us to gain a deeper understanding of the financial challenges facing our global economy and how we can address these challenges, provide more stability, and advance policies that will promote greater shared prosperity around the world. We are honored to welcome Managing Director Crystalina Georgieva to our campus at an important moment for the IMF as they approach their annual meetings here in Washington. We're grateful for her presence and for the insights that she will share with our community. It is an honor to welcome to the podium Crystalina Georgieva.
Choya Saksa. Thank you very much, President Georgieva, Dean Hellman, faculty, students, for giving me this opportunity to be with you today. And all the very best wishes to the Hoyas here and around the world. We are in Gaston Hall, and I stand in front of you. Behind me is the painting of Athena, the Greek goddess of wisdom, and a very good reference point for what I'm going to be talking to you about today. Our world economy is like ship in choppy waters. We need all the wisdom we can muster to steady the ship and navigate through what lies ahead. In less than 3 years, we lived through shock after shock after shock. First, COVID, then Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and climate disasters on all continents. These shocks have caused immense harm on people's lives. Their combined impact is driving a global surge in prices, especially on food and energy, causing a cost of living crisis. And dealing with them is made harder by geopolitical fragmentation. We are experiencing a fundamental shift in the world economy from one of relative predictability with the rules-based framework on international economic cooperation, very low interest rates, low inflation, to a world with more fragility, greater uncertainty, higher economic volatility, geopolitical confrontations, and more frequent and devastating natural disasters, a world in which any country can be thrown off course more easily and more often. So, what can we do to prevent this period of heightened fragility from becoming the new normal, from becoming the world you would be living in. First and foremost, we must stabilize the global economy, steady the ship, by addressing the most immediate challenges. And as we address the crisis of today, we must revitalize global cooperation and transform our economies so they can withstand the shocks to come in the future. And this is why at the IMF we are calling for early and joint action to regroup and to rethink how can we adopt a more proactive, precautionary mindset than we had in the past, and more willingness to act now and act together. This will be the focus of our annual meetings when they start next week. You're very familiar for all the arrivals of ministers, delegations. This year, our discussions are so very important for the future we build. So let me start with the urgency to stabilize the economy, given the darkening economic outlook. Last October, we projected a strong recovery from the depths of the COVID crisis. We finished the year with 6.1% global growth, very respectable. And most economists, including we at the IMF, were predicting the recovery to continue, inflation to subside quickly, largely because we expected vaccines will help tame supply-side disruptions and allow the economies to rebound. But this is not what happened. Multiple shocks, among them a senseless war, changed the economic picture dramatically. Far from being transitory, as we thought, inflation is much more persistent. High energy and food prices, tighter financial conditions, lingering supply disruptions decelerate growth. All of the world's largest economies are now slowing down. The euro area is severely affected by the reduction of gas supplies from Russia. China suffers from pandemic-related disruptions and a deepening downturn of their real estate market. And while the US still has a fairly vibrant and strong labor market, momentum is slowing down. Why? Because inflation is reducing disposable income of people, and consumer demand as a result is falling down, and higher interest rates are a drag on investments. This in turn affects emerging markets and developing countries. They face reduced demand for their exports and tighter financial conditions for those of them with high level of dollar-denominated debt. This is pretty dramatic. So what is happening is we have downgraded 3 times since October last year our growth projections. Last time we brought 22 to 3.2% growth, and for 23 projections was 2.9%. You will see we always come around the annual meetings with our World Economic Outlook, that we are further downgrading our growth projections for next year. And we will be flagging that the risks of recession are rising. Our estimate is that 1/3 of countries around the world, this is the 1/3 share of the world economy, would experience at least 2 consecutive quarters of contraction this year and next year. And even in countries where growth is positive, for hundreds and millions of people, it would feel like recession because inflation is eating into real incomes. Overall, we expect global output as a result of all this, to shrink between now and 2026 by $4 trillion. To give you a sense what is $4 trillion, this is the size of the German economy. Gone. And unfortunately, I'm the natural optimist, but today I stand in front of you and I need to say, more likely to get worse than to get better. In other words, risks are, as we say at the fund, on the downside. Why? Because uncertainty is very high in the context of war and a pandemic that hasn't quite left the scene. And what we see, and this is very concerning, is that financial stability risks are growing. Rapid and disorderly repricing of assets, especially where there are underlying vulnerabilities, can play a dangerous role for financial stability. So this is the picture, darker than we would have loved it to be. What can be done? And this is what our meetings are to wrestle with. How can policymakers stabilize the economy? Let me outline 3 priorities, and they're really, really important, starting from stay the course to bring inflation down. We make a misstep, the cost can be very significant. Not tightening enough would cause inflation to become de-anchored and entrenched, so with us for a long time, and that would require interest rates to tighten even more to bring it down, and that would cause tremendous harm on people, but also on prospects for growth. On the other hand, if we tighten too much, too fast, and do so in synchronized manner, we can push many economies into prolonged recession. So far, we see a relatively good shift. Tightening is leading to taking somewhat the heat out of domestic demand, including in the housing markets. Of course, not good if you are on the market right now, but it means that we are slowing down the risk for the economy. But we are not there yet. Central banks have to continue to respond. In the current environment, as painful that may be, this is the right thing to do. Even if the economy slows down as a result. Not easy, not without pain, but less pain if we take a look into the future. Do the right thing now. Now, we have monetary policy tightening. What about fiscal policy? Our second priority is for fiscal policy to act responsibly, to protect the most vulnerable households and businesses. In other words, to act without fueling inflation, to be a source of stability for the most vulnerable parts of society. Now, we have a severe cost of living crisis in some countries, already very painful on low-income households. So there has to be a helping hand for them. But these measures need to be very well targeted. Don't provide subsidies to the rich. Don't go for blanket price controls that benefit the poor but also benefit the wealthy. And make sure that these measures are temporary, that you are not embedding them in the economies forever. Where high energy prices are likely to persist, governments could provide direct help to low and middle income families and minimize the use of price controls. Why? Because we have learned the hard way that price controls, not affordable, not very effective. And avoiding this indiscriminatory fiscal support is very important for successfully fighting inflation. Just to give you a very simple image, when the monetary policy is stepping on the brakes. Fiscal policy should not step on the accelerator. Otherwise, we are for a very rough and dangerous ride. Our third priority is joint efforts to support emerging markets and developing economies. A stronger dollar, high borrowing cost, capital outflows, they cause a triple blow on emerging markets and developing economies. And what it means for them is probability of portfolio outflows going up. And we put now the risk of this happening over the next 3 quarters at 40%. That could cause a tremendous problem for countries with large external financing needs. Now, one thing we always recommend is to maintain exchange rate flexibility, but also countries can take a more proactive approach. They can take precautionary steps before a crisis emerges. We have provided a policy tool, it is called Integrated Policy Framework, to help countries calibrate the best possible policies, and then we have precautionary lending instruments so they can use them to cushion themselves against risks. And one thing that you probably have read and heard about a lot, the problem of debt. During COVID, what did governments do to help their people and their economies? They borrowed. Debt has gone up. Now we are in a situation in which for emerging markets, more than a quarter of them have either defaulted or have bonds that are trading in distress territory. And what is very difficult to accept is that the picture is much worse in low-income countries. Over 60% of low-income countries are at or near that distress. What does it mean? Well, when you have numbers growing, then the risk of a debt crisis grows as well. And if it is to happen, it would not only harm people in these countries, but it would harm global growth and global financial stability. So we have to reduce the risk of this debt crisis. 2 years ago, a platform was developed. It is called Common Framework for Debt Resolution, which brings all creditors around the table, both official and private sector creditors, to provide debt relief to countries that ask for it. 3 countries asked: Zambia, Chad, and Ethiopia. It has taken a long time, but finally we have an agreement on Zambia. We need faster, more predictable functioning of the common framework. And it is very important that large creditors bear their responsibility to act, like China and the private sector. It is not only the right thing to do for countries, it is in their interest to act early to prevent a debt crisis. So these are the immediate actions we have to take. Hopefully you will see us coming out of the meetings strong on taking these actions. But that is not going to be enough for our future. We need transformational reforms, and we need to support our members in undertaking these reforms. This is the focus of our work. So let me give you an example. Public finance. We are well known for this being our bread and butter. Countries can use medium-term fiscal sustainability frameworks to define space to invest in long-term objectives: education, health, social protection, but also digitalization to open the doors for innovation and for cutting-edge digital government services that are more transparent and more efficient. And think how we can use smart policies that we have been using in countries already. We know how to do that. So we can enable a digital-ready workforce to help people, especially young people, enter the workforce and stay there. We are also very keen for financial inclusion to open the door for innovation and participation of those who bring the future naturally with them. By the way, we should remember that if there was one silver lining from the pandemic, it was the power of digitalization. How many of you had to study from home? Of course. How many of you worked from home? Well, it wasn't great fun. Obviously, it is much better to be together, but we didn't miss on doing our jobs and we didn't miss on studying because we were digitally enabled. Think of the people that are not. So yes, we have some ability to project a more resilient future, but let me be very clear. That can only happen if countries work together. We have to face to the chilling effects of fragmentation. We cannot afford the world to break apart. We need to step up our efforts and raise our voices. We need each other. And let me talk about some of the areas where we need each other. We cannot succeed working alone. First, food security. Breaks my heart that we are going backwards on hunger. Hunger is the world's greatest solvable problem, but instead of solving it, we are marching backwards. Today, 345 million people are acutely insecure. What does acutely mean? They're desperate. Mothers and fathers cannot feed their children. So the world has to unite around addressing food security. We at the IMF just created a new food shock window in our emergency financing so we can provide help to countries. We have identified $9 billion in balance of payment needs, and we want to be part of the solution to countries that face this problem. Another obvious area where we need each other is climate change. It is an existential threat to humanity. We can survive inflation, we can survive recession, we cannot survive unmitigated climate crisis. We simply cannot. We have COP27. Do you know what is COP27? I see people nodding. We have to use it to mobilize action. At the fund, we have done something really fantastic. We have created our first ever long-term financing instrument. It is called Resilience and Sustainability Trust. We already have $40 billion for it. 2 countries crossed the finish line, Barbados and Costa Rica, to be the first to benefit from it. What we want is to use it primarily to remove barriers for private investment, because we need capital on scale for countries to succeed. I apologize. And with our policy advice, the IMF is helping our members. Actually, I can help myself. How would our members believe me that we can help them if I cannot help myself to get water? We have done tremendous work in capacity development. Just imagine we have provided policy capacity development support to 174 countries since the pandemic started, in key areas like domestic revenue mobilization, debt sustainability, public investment management. And we, of course, are a financier. Since the pandemic, we have provided $258 billion to 93 countries. And since the Russia invasion, we have supported 16 countries with $90 billion. This comes on top of $650 billion SDR allocation we did last year. So the IMF is stepping up in a more shock-prone world. And I promise you, we will continue to do so. So let me conclude going back to Athena. Do you know that she is also the patroness of weaving? Do you know that? Well, she is. If we are to navigate our way through this period of historic fragility, we must weave a new economic and social fabric that is stronger and more resilient. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice, guys. But not before I tell you this. We look back, COVID hits, the world comes together. We have overcome the worst of the COVID crisis. How? Together. Working together, we can have a better future for absolutely everyone, everywhere on our planet. And with this, I thank you. And I apologize for my voice. I can tell you, guys, when we are close to annual meetings, all I have to do is meet people and talk. So I'm obviously doing a little bit, perhaps more than I should.
Take a moment to get
to get myself together.
You've been watching live feeds from Washington, D.C., where the IMF Managing Director, Crystalina Georgieva, has been delivering her Curtain Riser speech on the global economic outlook and policy priorities in the months ahead at the Georgetown University. Titled Navigating a More Fragile World, the IMF boss said following the COVID-19 pandemic and darkening economic outlook, a third of the world economies face 2 consecutive contractions in coming years. There will also be a global output loss of $4 trillion till 2026. On what can be done to mitigate the impact, she mentioned 3 priorities for countries which are formulating policies to bring inflation down, responsible fiscal policy to protect vulnerable households and businesses, and joint effort to support emerging markets and developing economies.